People always assume an empty piece of land belongs to nobody. They never stop to wonder why it's empty. The first thing that hit me that Saturday morning wasn't the sound. It was the smell. Fresh diesel exhaust drifted across the still surface of Blackwater Lake, cutting through the familiar scent of pine needles, damp cedar, and cool morning mist that had welcomed my family here for over 30 years. I hadn't even stepped out of my truck before I saw it. A 40-foot luxury RV sat squarely in the middle of my cabin lot, parked exactly where my father used to line up his fishing boat before sunrise every Memorial Day. Chrome reflected the golden light coming off the water. Leveling jacks were already planted into the gravel, and someone had unfolded lawn chairs across my property as if they'd booked a lakeside resort. The soft hum of a portable generator echoed across the shoreline while laughter carried over the water. Whoever had parked there wasn't passing through. They had moved in. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 42 years old, and I make my living repairing commercial marine engines along the northern Wisconsin lakes. Diesel, propellers, transmissions, anything that floats and burns fuel eventually ends up in my shop. My hands always smell faintly of engine oil no matter how many times I scrub them. And honestly, I stopped caring years ago. Honest work leaves honest marks. After my divorce 5 years ago, this cabin became more than just family property. It became the one place where life slowed down enough for me to hear myself think. My grandfather bought this lakefront lot back in 1984, long before expensive vacation homes surrounded the shoreline. My dad built the little cedar cabin himself one summer with nothing but borrowed tools, determination, and neighbors who traded labor for barbecue and cold beer. Every weathered board carried fingerprints from someone I loved. The dock stretched 60 feet into crystal-clear water where I learned to cast my first fishing line, and the old oak tree beside the gravel drive still leaned just enough to shade the picnic table Dad refused to replace because he said memories looked better on worn wood. I never rented the place out. I never listed it online. Sometimes weeks passed before I visited because work kept me busy, but every tax bill was paid, every permit renewed, every property line professionally surveyed. Empty never meant abandoned. Empty simply meant peaceful. As I pulled closer, I noticed something else. A white Lexus SUV with an HOA parking permit sat beside the RV, polished so perfectly it reflected the lake like a mirror. Standing next to it was a woman wearing designer sunglasses, spotless hiking boots that had clearly never touched an actual trail, and the kind of confident smile that usually belonged to people who had never once been told no. She watched me park without the slightest hint of concern, folded her arms, and waited as though I were the unexpected visitor. Before I could even say good morning, she glanced toward the RV, then back at me, smiled politely, and said, "If you're here to fish, you'll have to come back another weekend. We've already claimed this lot for the HOA camping retreat." For a second, I honestly wondered if I had somehow driven onto the wrong property. Then I looked past her shoulder and saw the old cedar cabin exactly where it had always been. The green metal roof Dad installed after the storm of 1998 still caught the morning sun the same way. The small wooden wind chime my mother bought at a roadside craft fair nearly 20 years ago still swayed gently beneath the porch. Even from 50 yards away, I could hear its familiar hollow clink whenever the breeze rolled off the lake. No, I was exactly where I belonged. She was not. I stepped out of my truck and felt the familiar crunch of crushed granite beneath my work boots. That sound had never changed. Neither had the narrow footpath leading to the dock where generations of my family had started countless mornings before daylight with coffee in one hand and fishing rods in the other. My grandfather used to say that a lake tells the truth because water remembers everything. Standing there watching strangers unfold camping tables on my family property, I found myself thinking about those words more than ever. My father never cared about expensive vacations. Every extra dollar he earned working construction went into improving this little cabin instead. One year he replaced every window himself. Another summer we spent 3 weekends rebuilding the dock after spring ice tore it apart. I was 12 when he first trusted me to help pour the concrete footings for the storage shed. I still remember the smell of wet cement mixing with fresh sawdust while he smiled and told me that anything worth owning was worth maintaining. Those lessons stayed with me long after he was gone. That was why I drove nearly 3 hours every month just to mow the grass, inspect the roof, clear fallen branches, and make sure everything remained exactly as he left it. Most people saw an empty cabin sitting quietly beside a lake. I saw birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, fishing tournaments, and quiet evenings listening to loons echo across the water after sunset. Every faded scratch on the porch railing came with a story. Every worn step carried footprints from someone I missed. Leaving the place empty between visits was never neglect. It was respect. I wanted the cabin to stay exactly what it had always been, a family retreat instead of another crowded vacation rental. Apparently, someone else had looked at that same silence and mistaken it for opportunity. As I walked closer, new details kept catching my eye. Thick electrical cables stretched from the RV toward the exterior outlet mounted beside my storage shed. A fresh water hose snaked across my lawn to the outdoor faucet Dad installed 30 years ago. Folding bicycles leaned against my oak tree. Two inflatable kayaks rested beside my dock as though they had always belonged there. Even the fire pit contained fresh ashes from the night before. They had not simply parked for lunch. They had settled in comfortably enough to rearrange my property around their vacation. Then I noticed a laminated sign zip tied to a folding table near the RV entrance. It read, Willow Creek Homeowners Association Lakeside Weekend Gathering. Below that, someone had handwritten, reserved for members only. I stared at those words while the breeze carried the smell of bacon cooking from an outdoor griddle, and for the first time that morning I realized this had never been a misunderstanding. Someone had made a deliberate decision to treat my private family property like community land, and judging by the confidence on that woman's face, she fully expected nobody to stop her. The woman lowered her sunglasses just enough to study me like I was an inconvenience interrupting her weekend. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of polished confidence that usually comes from years of getting exactly what she wants. I smiled politely because my father had always believed that calm people collected better evidence than angry ones. "Actually," I said, "this is my property." She laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncertain one. A genuine laugh that spread across the campsite and drew the attention of half a dozen people standing near the picnic tables. A man wearing an expensive fishing shirt looked over from the grill, while two teenagers stopped inflating paddleboards to watch the conversation. The woman folded her arms and shook her head. "No, it is not. This lot has been sitting empty for months. The association approved temporary recreational use." I glanced toward the cabin again. My mailbox still displayed my last name in black metal letters. The county-issued fire number remained bolted beside the front steps. Even my trail camera was still attached to the oak tree about 20 feet away. Nothing about the place suggested abandonment. "The county disagrees with you," I answered calmly. "So does the deed." Her smile hardened. "I am Melissa Bradford, president of Willow Creek Homeowners Association. We have every right to improve underused community spaces." Community spaces. The words almost made me laugh. My cabin was nearly half a mile outside the official subdivision boundary. The Homeowners Association had absolutely no jurisdiction over my land. I knew that because I had personally reviewed the county survey after buying out my sister's ownership share 3 years earlier. Every property marker had been professionally verified. There was no gray area. Melissa simply believed confidence could replace facts. She waved one hand toward the RV. "We are only here for the weekend. Everyone appreciates having access to the lake. You should really think about being a better neighbor." I looked around slowly. More vehicles had arrived while we were talking. Another pickup truck pulled into my gravel driveway without hesitation. Someone opened the tailgate and unloaded coolers as though they had reserved a campsite months ago. Children ran across my lawn chasing each other with plastic water toys, while an older couple carried folding chairs toward my dock. The generator continued humming steadily, mixing with country music drifting from outdoor speakers mounted beneath the RV awning. Every few seconds, another unfamiliar face stepped onto my property, completely convinced they belonged there. What caught my attention most was not the people. It was the small details. Tire tracks had pressed deep into the soft grass beside the cabin. Fresh wooden stakes marked spaces labeled visitor parking. Bright orange extension cords crossed my yard toward portable lights that had obviously been used after dark. Someone had even tied decorative banners between two trees my father planted when I was still in elementary school. Weeks of careful maintenance had disappeared in less than 24 hours. Melissa noticed me studying everything and mistook my silence for surrender. She smiled wider. "See? Everybody is enjoying themselves." There is really no reason to create conflict over an unused lot. I slipped my phone from my pocket without saying another word. The screen reflected the morning sunlight as I quietly opened an app connected to every security camera surrounding the cabin. While Melissa continued explaining why my property somehow belonged to everyone else, each live camera feed had already started recording every single word. I never interrupted her. That seemed to bother Melissa more than any argument could have. She kept explaining association policies that had absolutely nothing to do with my property, speaking with the practiced confidence of someone who expected every conversation to end in compliance. When she finally paused long enough to take a breath, I reached into the center console of my truck and pulled out a weathered blue document folder. The corners were worn from years of riding behind my driver's seat, and the plastic smelled faintly of dust and old paper every time I opened it. Inside sat copies of my deed, the certified survey completed 3 years earlier, my current property tax receipt, and the lake access permit issued by the county. I handed her the top document. She barely looked at it before pushing it back toward me. "Those papers do not matter," she said. "The board already approved this location for recreational use." I blinked once. "The board does not own this land. They manage the neighborhood. This cabin is not inside your neighborhood." Her smile never disappeared. "That is your opinion." I looked down at the survey maps spread across the hood of my truck. Bright red boundary lines clearly marked every corner of the property. Steel survey pins still sat exactly where the licensed surveyor had driven them into the ground. One of those markers rested less than 10 feet from the front tire of her recreational vehicle. I pointed directly toward it. "See that orange cap beside your wheel? That is the property corner." She did not even turn around. "Those little markers are everywhere." Around us, the campground atmosphere only grew louder. Someone switched on another portable speaker. The smell of charcoal drifted from the grill while children laughed near the shoreline. A golden retriever sprinted across my lawn carrying what looked suspiciously like one of my old dock bumpers. Another family unloaded folding tables from the back of a pickup truck and arranged them beside my storage shed without asking a single question. Watching complete strangers organize a weekend gathering around memories my family had spent decades building felt strangely unreal. Yet I refused to rush. Every unnecessary sentence Melissa spoke was quietly being preserved by my cameras, each one time stamped down to the second. I noticed one of the guests walking over with a paper plate in his hand. He glanced between us with an awkward smile. "Everything okay?" Melissa answered before I could speak. "Just clearing up a misunderstanding." He thought this property belonged to him. The man chuckled politely and walked away, accepting her version without hesitation. That told me everything I needed to know. She had already convinced everyone this place was available. Whether through arrogance or carelessness, she had created an entire weekend around an assumption that could be disproved in less than 60 seconds. I folded the survey back into its sleeve and slipped it into the folder. "Melissa," I said as calmly as I could, "I am giving you the opportunity to leave before this becomes expensive." She tilted her head, almost amused. "Is that supposed to scare me?" I simply smiled. "No, it is supposed to help you." She laughed again, louder this time, attracting more attention from the campers. "Nobody is going anywhere," she declared. "You can call whoever you want." I nodded once, slid the document folder back into my truck, locked the door with a quiet click, and realized she had finally given me the one thing I had been waiting for all morning. A clear, unmistakable refusal to leave private property after being formally informed who owned it. I walked back toward the cabin without another word, and behind me I heard Melissa tell someone, "See? They always back down." The sentence almost made me smile. People often mistake patience for surrender because they have never learned the difference. I unlocked the cabin, stepped inside, and the familiar scent of cedar walls and old coffee drifted through the cool air. Everything was exactly where I had left it 2 weeks earlier. Dad's tackle box still sat on the shelf beside the stone fireplace. The framed photograph of my grandparents holding a string of bass caught the morning sunlight through the front window. Outside, I could hear the steady buzz of the generator, children laughing near the dock, and the occasional slam of an RV storage compartment. It sounded less like my quiet retreat and more like a crowded campground. I set my keys on the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and connected to the cabin's security system. 8 camera feeds appeared across the screen. Every angle of the property was visible in crystal clear detail. The driveway, the dock, the storage shed, the electrical outlet, the property corners, even the old oak tree where my trail camera quietly watched the entrance road. Timestamps rolled across every frame. Melissa had unknowingly provided hours of beautifully organized evidence. I copied the recordings to a secure drive, then opened another folder containing scanned copies of my deed, county survey, tax records, and the towing authorization agreement I signed years ago with North Shore Recovery. Living beside a popular lake teaches you to prepare for situations most people never imagine. Every private property owner around here eventually deals with abandoned trailers, unauthorized boats, or vehicles blocking emergency access. Rather than argue with strangers, I signed a standing agreement allowing licensed towing whenever unauthorized vehicles remained after proper notice. I had hoped I would never need it. I reached for my phone and made 3 calm calls. The first went to the county non-emergency dispatch line. I explained that individuals were refusing to leave private property after being informed of ownership. The dispatcher listened carefully, confirmed the address, and said a deputy would stop by as soon as one became available. My second call went to North Shore Recovery. The office manager recognized my name immediately. "Still the lake cabin?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. The large motorhome parked beside the oak tree. She pulled up my standing authorization within seconds. "Understood. We will wait until law enforcement confirms the trespass refusal before dispatching the heavy wrecker." Exactly what I expected. Procedures mattered. My final call went to the county lake management office. I mentioned that a large recreational vehicle appeared to be using shoreline utilities on private property during an unauthorized gathering. The woman thanked me and said an inspector was already working nearby. I closed the laptop and stepped back onto the porch carrying nothing except a bottle of water. Melissa noticed me immediately. She wore the same confident smile, convinced I had accepted defeat. Around her, more guests continued arriving. Folding chairs multiplied across my lawn. Fresh tire tracks pressed deeper into the grass. Someone plugged another extension cord into the exterior outlet beside the shed without asking permission. Nobody realized every passing minute strengthened the record instead of weakening it. I leaned quietly against the porch railing, listening to the wind ripple across Blackwater Lake, and waited for the first official vehicle to appear at the end of my gravel driveway. About 20 minutes later, I heard another engine, but this one carried a completely different sound. The steady idle of a county patrol sport utility vehicle rolled down the gravel driveway, with none of the excitement television likes to invent. Deputy Aaron Collins stepped out wearing mirrored sunglasses, a tan uniform, and the relaxed expression of someone who had probably settled 100 neighborhood disputes before lunch. He glanced across the property without saying a word, taking in the recreational vehicle, the folding tables, the crowd, and finally me standing quietly on my porch. I walked down to meet him halfway. We shook hands, and I handed him my driver's license, property deed, certified survey, and current tax receipt before he even had to ask. Years of working with commercial marinas had taught me one simple lesson. Organized paperwork solved problems faster than loud opinions. Deputy Collins studied each document carefully, compared the survey with the property markers visible beside the driveway, then nodded once. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Walker." His calm voice carried just enough for Melissa to hear. She marched toward us before he finished speaking, still wearing that confident smile. "Deputy, thank goodness you are here," she announced. "This gentleman keeps trying to disrupt our association event." Collins politely raised one hand. "Ma'am, I will speak with everyone, but first I need to establish ownership." Melissa folded her arms. "The Homeowners Association approved temporary recreational use." Collins looked directly at her. "Do you have a recorded easement, lease agreement, written permission from the owner, or any county document granting you access to this property?" For the first time all morning, her confidence hesitated. Well, the board agreed the lot was unused. That was not my question. She shifted her weight and glanced toward several guests who had quietly stopped cooking breakfast to watch. "No, but everyone knows nobody stays here." Collins nodded slowly and wrote something in his small notebook. "Vacant does not mean public." The words settled over the campsite like a sudden change in weather. Conversations faded. Country music still played softly beneath the RV awning, but nobody seemed interested in it anymore. Collins walked with me to the nearest survey marker. The bright orange cap remained exactly where the licensed surveyor had installed it. He compared its location with the survey map, then walked another 60 feet to the next marker near the shoreline. Everything matched perfectly. Melissa followed several steps behind, still insisting the association had authority because the property looked abandoned. Collins listened patiently before closing his notebook. "Ma'am, Mr. Walker has identified himself as the legal owner, provided documentation, and has formally requested that unauthorized vehicles leave his property. I am now advising you to relocate the recreational vehicle." She crossed her arms tighter. "We are not leaving. This gathering has already started." Collins remained completely calm. "I need to be very clear. Refusing the owner's lawful request may result in additional consequences beyond simply moving the vehicle." Melissa laughed softly, glanced toward the campers, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "He is bluffing. Nobody is towing a 40-foot motorhome over a simple misunderstanding." I reached into my pocket, unlocked my phone, and quietly sent a single text message that contained only 3 words. "Authorization confirmed." Less than 30 seconds later, somewhere beyond the line of tall pine trees, the deep rumble of a heavy-duty tow truck engine echoed across Blackwater Lake. The heavy wrecker eased around the last bend of the gravel road with bright amber warning lights flashing silently in the morning sun. Its massive boom rose above the pine trees like a construction crane, and the deep rumble of its diesel engine echoed across the lake until every conversation on my property came to a complete stop. Even the children stopped playing near the dock. Coffee cups froze halfway to people's mouths. The driver climbed down wearing a reflective safety vest with North Shore Recovery stitched across the back, carrying a clipboard instead of an attitude. He walked directly toward Deputy Collins first. They spoke quietly for less than a minute while the deputy reviewed my documents one final time and pointed toward the recreational vehicle. Then the tow operator approached me. "Mr. Walker?" I nodded. "Are you still requesting removal under your standing authorization agreement?" "Yes," I answered. "The owner has been informed this is private property and has refused to leave." He checked one box on his clipboard, thanked me, and returned to the truck. Melissa finally realized this was no longer an argument. She hurried across the grass, her hiking boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. "You cannot seriously be doing this," she snapped toward the deputy. Collins remained completely composed. "Ma'am, you were advised to relocate the vehicle voluntarily. That opportunity was provided." She pointed at me with obvious frustration. "He never even uses this place." Collins answered before I could. "Property ownership is not determined by frequency of visits." Around us, the mood changed almost instantly. Guests who had looked perfectly comfortable only minutes earlier suddenly began folding chairs and quietly packing coolers into their vehicles. One older couple disconnected an extension cord without saying a word. Another man hurried to move his pickup away from the recreational vehicle, as if he suddenly remembered an appointment somewhere else. Nobody wanted to become part of a legal situation they did not understand. The tow operator completed a slow inspection, photographing each side of the motorhome, its license plate, its position relative to the survey markers, and the surrounding property. Every image was carefully documented before a single piece of equipment touched the vehicle. Watching him work reminded me of experienced mechanics. The professionals never rushed because careful work prevented expensive mistakes later. Melissa kept insisting this was all unnecessary. "We are leaving anyway," she argued. The tow operator politely shook his head. "The removal process has already been authorized after refusal. I cannot cancel without instruction from the property owner and the deputy." She looked at me, expecting sympathy. I simply stood beside the porch with my bottle of water, saying nothing. I had offered every reasonable opportunity hours earlier. The silence between us now felt heavier than any argument could have. Hydraulic controls began humming as the recovery equipment slowly positioned itself. The metallic clicks of chains and lifting gear mixed with the gentle sound of waves brushing against the dock where my father once tied his fishing boat every Saturday morning. That contrast stayed with me. The lake remained perfectly peaceful while the consequences of one bad decision unfolded with calm precision. Just then another county vehicle rolled into the driveway. This one belonged to Lake Management. Inspector Denise Harper stepped out carrying a tablet and walked straight toward the shoreline. She paused beside the recreational vehicle, looked down at the ground beneath one side compartment, took several photographs, and then quietly began writing notes. Whatever had caught her attention had nothing to do with parking anymore, and judging by the serious expression on her face, the morning was about to become much more expensive than anyone had expected. Inspector Denise Harper knelt beside the rear corner of the recreational vehicle without saying a word. She slipped on a pair of blue inspection gloves, examined the gravel for several seconds, then looked toward the shoreline where a faint rainbow sheen shimmered across a shallow puddle near the grass. The smell reached me a moment later, light but unmistakable. Fuel mixed with warm engine oil. It was not a major spill, but it did not have to be. Around protected lakes, even a small leak demanded attention. Denise photographed the area from several angles before tracing a narrow line of fresh fluid leading beneath the motorhome. Melissa hurried over, clearly sensing that the situation had changed. "That has nothing to do with us," she insisted. Denise remained focused on her inspection. "Ma'am, I have not reached any conclusions yet." She continued documenting the ground, then checked the temporary water hose stretched across my lawn and the electrical cable running from my exterior outlet into the recreational vehicle. "Who authorized these utility connections?" she asked. Melissa answered immediately. "The association approved them." Denise finally looked up. "Did the property owner approve them?" Silence. That single question seemed to weigh more than every argument that morning. Around us, the remaining campers quietly packed coolers into their vehicles. Folding tables disappeared one by one. Nobody laughed anymore. Even the country music had been switched off, leaving only the soft breeze moving through the pine trees and the steady idle of the heavy tow truck. Deputy Collins watched everything without interruption while the recovery operator completed another safety check around the motorhome. Denise entered several notes into her tablet before speaking again. Unauthorized shoreline utility use, unauthorized occupancy of private property, and a possible petroleum discharge near protected water all require documentation. Additional review will determine whether further action is necessary. Melissa's confident smile finally disappeared. "This is completely ridiculous," she said. "We were only here for a weekend." Denise answered calmly. "Intent does not change responsibility." Those 5 words settled over the property like still water after a passing boat. I remembered something my father used to tell me whenever I worked beside him in the garage. He would say that machines never cared about excuses. They only responded to maintenance or neglect. The law felt very similar. It did not reward confidence. It rewarded facts. Within minutes, the heavy wrecker slowly lifted the front axle of the recreational vehicle using professional recovery equipment designed specifically for oversized motorhomes. Every movement was deliberate. Every chain was checked twice. Melissa stood motionless while several former association members quietly avoided eye contact as they drove away. No one offered to argue on her behalf anymore. The laminated sign announcing the Homeowners Association weekend gathering fluttered loosely against the folding table before one of the guests quietly removed it and placed it inside a storage compartment without saying a word. The illusion that this had somehow been community property had completely vanished. As the motorhome began rolling slowly toward the driveway behind the tow truck, the deep tracks left in my gravel reminded me exactly where it had been sitting only an hour earlier. Melissa watched it disappear between the tall pines, her shoulders dropping a little farther with every yard. Deputy Collins handed her several documents explaining the next steps regarding the removal process and the trespass report, while Inspector Harper informed her that the environmental review would continue separately. I stood beside the old porch railing listening to the wind chimes gently ring above the front steps, realizing the loudest sound left on the property was no longer the generator or the arguments. It was the quiet return of the lake exactly as my family had always known it. By late afternoon, the lake looked exactly the way it had that morning before the unexpected visitors arrived. The breeze carried the clean scent of pine across the water again, replacing the lingering smell of diesel that had hung over the shoreline for hours. I spent the next couple of hours picking up the last few forgotten paper cups, folding chairs someone had abandoned in a hurry, and small pieces of decorative ribbon that had blown into the grass beneath the oak tree. None of it made me angry anymore. It simply reminded me how quickly people can mistake someone else's patience for permission. Before leaving, Deputy Collins stopped by the porch to shake my hand one last time. He thanked me for remaining calm throughout the entire situation and quietly said something that stuck with me. Most property disputes become difficult because people stop listening to facts. Then he climbed into his patrol vehicle and disappeared down the gravel road. Inspector Harper returned briefly a few days later to complete her documentation. She confirmed that the environmental review had been forwarded through the proper channels and that any remaining decisions would follow the normal administrative process. As for the recreational vehicle, I later learned that recovery charges, storage costs, and related fees continued accumulating until everything was resolved. None of that brought me satisfaction by itself. Money was never the point. Respect was. The following weekend I came back with fresh gravel, a rake, and a new cedar post. I installed a simple handcrafted sign beside the driveway where everyone entering the property could see it without missing a single letter. Private family property. Authorized access only. It was not flashy. It did not threaten anyone. It simply stated the truth. While tightening the last stainless steel bolt, I looked toward the dock where my father used to clean fish every Saturday afternoon. The sunlight reflected off the calm water exactly the way it had when I was a little boy sitting beside him with muddy boots dangling over the edge. For a moment it felt like he was still there, reminding me that the strongest response was usually the quietest one. Several neighbors from nearby lake properties stopped over during the next few weeks after hearing what had happened. A few shared stories about unauthorized campers, mistaken property lines, and visitors who assumed empty cabins belonged to nobody. More than one person told me they planned to update their own surveys, security cameras, and emergency contact information after seeing how easily confusion could grow into something much larger. If any good came from that weekend, perhaps it was the reminder that protecting property begins long before problems appear. Preparation is invisible until the day it matters. Every survey, every receipt, every camera, every permit, every calm conversation had quietly done its job. Looking back now, I do not remember Melissa's arguments nearly as clearly as I remember the sound of my family's wind chime returning after the generators were gone. I remember the gentle ripple of Blackwater Lake against the dock. I remember the crunch of gravel beneath my boots as I locked the cabin for the drive home. Most of all, I remember realizing that justice rarely arrives with raised voices or dramatic speeches. More often, it arrives one document, one decision, and one lawful step at a time. An empty cabin never meant an owner had disappeared. It only meant someone had cared enough to leave a peaceful place exactly as it was meant to be, and that is precisely how it remains today.